preview. I want real thing. It says preview. I don't want preview, I want live. Starting live. Okay, let's see. Hopefully this is going live. Are we live? Hopefully. I'm checking my phone to see. It should be coming up anytime. I've got it on my, I got YouTube on my thing. Oh, good. Yes.
It says preview.
It's okay.
I don't want preview, I want live.
Boy, that was a long time ago. Okay, hopefully you guys all see me.
Okay, let's see.
I'm going to turn all this down, and hopefully I can see the chat as it comes up. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. Whoops, no, I can't do it that way. I guess I got to turn it this way. I'll be monitoring the chat on my phone today, and I'll be trying to monitor anybody who talks on Patreon to me on this little old iPad, this poor rinky-dink old thing. I am definitely not in the best place today. My laptop, for those of you who have not heard the news, my laptop died. Here, I'm going to put this down. My laptop died on me. Here's my laptop. It's a very old MacBook, and I love it. It's my baby. It's very old, and it's just always been a workhorse for me, and always comes through in a pinch, far more than my PCs, because I use PCs. This is a PC, so Mac lovers, you know, be happy, but PC lovers know I love PC as well. I do all my videos on PC, so I'm one of those ambidextrous folks. But I just love this this MacBook, but it's old, and so the battery is weak on it, so I have to always carry my charger with me. And I took it to AMS, and I think I plugged it into a wall socket that wasn't friendly. And I'm afraid I let some of the smoke out of the box, as engineers oftentimes say. When you let the smoke out of the box, they don't work very well, and then it just kind of died on me. And I didn't even know. So I was working fast and furiously last night, finishing the charts for today's mini course, which was supposed to be coronal mass ejections and aliens. This was going to be the very first of a series of space weather phenomena, and this was going to be a fun one because I was going to actually mix in, and I still have the charts, they're on that laptop. I'm going to mix in some history of coronal mass ejections, which is really fun. I mean, it's probably the most fun aspect of space weather when it comes to the history of it, just because of how the whole thing came about. You know, solar flares are easy to see, and we see them on the sun, and you know, we started seeing them early on as astronomers, even from the naked eye. People were seeing things, and you know, back in the old, you know, almost prehistory or pre-science days, where people were just writing down records or passing down word of mouth. And we saw all these types of things on the sun. We saw sunspots, there were flares and things like that, bright spots. People saw that kind of stuff, and we were able to make anecdotal stories about them. But coronal mass ejections are completely different because they're completely invisible. So we weren't able to discover them really except through how the Earth responded. And so that makes the history of coronal mass ejections very exciting and very neat, because it shows kind of how the whole thing about space weather evolved. So part of the story with this mini course, it's going to be coming up as soon as I get a new one of these, which I've ordered already. I ordered 2 of them so that I would never be without them. But, oh, and you know what? Let me just make sure my audio isn't getting too hot. Hopefully it's not too loud for you guys. But let me go back. Hold on. Okay. But the problem, and I lost my train of thought. But anyway, I can't do that mini course until I get those charts, you know, accessible again. And what's cool is that it show the history of coronal mass ejections, how space weather kind of evolved a little bit and I'll kind of push it forward to the modern way of thinking, and you'll see in a very rapid fashion how quickly we went from not understanding how the sun worked and how the fact that it even blew a wind at us, to what modern day models show us about coronal mass ejections and how they are uniquely connected to all sorts of space weather phenomena and everything that happens at Earth. So we're going to have to wait for at least a week. I've actually had someone on Patreon request, Andreas, I believe it was you, Yes, Andreas, you said please postpone the mini course by 2 weeks. So that's very doable. I'm not even sure if my new chargers will arrive by next Saturday. So I will have not have a problem postponing for 2 weeks. And thank you guys for being so understanding thus far. I know that things have been a little bit crazy, so it's much appreciated. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing anybody in the chat. I see 12 watching now, so I'm not seeing a lot of people on. I sure hope I put this as publicly accessible, because last time I did that, not too many people showed up because it wasn't, I didn't make it accessible. Anyway, let's hope. But what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and do a quick overview of what the weather is doing on the sun. I did one last night for patrons, and so it's not going to be all that different, but there are a few changes here and there, and I'll be able to update you on that coronal hole. Just the one on the back side, we'll take a look at stereo and see if it's changed very much so that we know whether or not we're going to have a solar storm coming up soon. And then I've got a lot of cool stuff from the AMS I can show you. If people don't have a lot of questions, I can kind of give you an overview of some of the presentations that I gave. I actually gave a talk on this space weather community because people in the scientific realm are getting very interested in what the space weather community is doing. So I can do all that. So let me get started. First, let's just talk about the sun just a little bit. I have 211 angstroms up. That's the purple sun, mainly because I wanted you guys to see all of these dark regions. In the video that I will actually release later today on YouTube, it's already, like I said, been for my patrons, but I'll put it publicly because it actually shows, it goes into a little bit more detail of what the sun is doing, and it also shows the magnetic field lines that the models are showing right now. Even though it looks like there is kind of like a coronal hole here, it's really not. There's only a couple places that are open to fast solar, that are open and shooting out from some fast solar wind. So don't be fooled by this. It's just cold. This is just because the sun, we're near solar, we are at solar minimum. So there's just not a lot of activity, and so the emission is just not very strong right now. And that's one of the reasons why all of this looks so dark. But yeah, we are getting pockets of fast wind, and what I was telling everyone yesterday is that easily over the next 3 to 5 days, we're going to be getting some very sporadic fast wind that could bump us up to, possibly even active conditions at low latitude. So you'll see the KP jump to 4 and then disappear, just like it did the other day. And it won't last long. It'll just be a small pocket, and it may not even be enough to really get some active aurora going. It's just that the geomagnetic, our magnetic shield just wiggles intensely for a short while, and that's enough to bump up and fool the KP index structure to put it up to these high levels and then back down very quickly. But it doesn't mean we're getting a lot of visible aurora that you can see down at mid-latitudes, despite the fact that you're getting signatures like KP4. So, don't, unfortunately, those at mid-latitudes, don't get super excited that we're going to get a big storm from this, because we're really not. But we will see pockets of these things come up and drop back down for the next few days. We also had this region here. There it is right there. It did shoot something that looked like a little mini solar storm. You'll see it go pop here in a second. Right about now, pop right there. Did you see that? And then it kind of died off a little bit. Some people have been asking me, is that a solar storm that's headed towards Earth? It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like there was enough there to give us anything. If anything, it would be arriving here in the next day or so. But I don't think that we're even going to be able to tell the difference between that structure. If there was any part of it, even though it looks like it launched, if there's any part of it that escaped, it launched probably northeast of us. But we probably wouldn't even be able to tell the difference between that little mini solar storm and all of this jumbled mess that we're getting from this region here. So again, expect unsettled conditions. Expect, if you're at high latitudes, yes, you could get some aurora. I don't expect anything more than simply green arcs, but just brighter green arcs. You might obviously get some coronas and things like that, but it's not going to last all that long. Not expecting a lot of storm time aurora, the beautiful rainbow colors and all that. None of that from this. But you could get some pulsating aurora. So, You could get that. I don't know if you're going to see the subaurora arc, aka Steve. That we're not really even getting much substorm activity for that. As a matter of fact, I think I have the substorm. I might even have the substorm index up. Let me see here. Do I? No, I don't look like I have it. I looked. Oh, there it is. Yes, I do. Okay, let me pull this over here. Sorry, it goes white. White screen. Are you going to show it to me? Or are you just going to get me a white screen? Come on. It doesn't want to show it to me. I had it the other day. Hello. All right. Well, it's not that exciting anyway. Yeah, it's not going to give it to me. How funny. Maybe that's because I'm streaming, and so it's just too much for it to download. But it's not popping. We're getting like little mini substorms, not even 500, you know, which is kind of the rule of thumb for aurora. So it's not going to be lasting all that long, and that's the way I'm going to pretty much expect it to continue. So even at high latitudes, you're not getting a great big show. Now, if I switch, I'm going to stop this, and if I go to look at X-ray flux, I'm going to look at the long-term X-ray flux. We're still way down there when it comes to X-ray flux. My gosh, you know, we're not even at the B floor anymore, and it's still completely flatlined. And unfortunately, this is just the way it's going to be probably for the next, oh my goodness, I don't know how long. I don't see any active regions on the sun's backside right now, so we'll probably have at least 2 weeks more of this. The nice thing is that we've actually been, at least for you, for the amateur radio operators and shortwave responders, we've actually been dealing with a little bit of a meteor shower, the quaternids, I believe their name is. And I had someone ask me the other day, why is 6 meters hopping? And I've gotten better contacts over 6 meters than I've got, you know, recently than I've gotten in, you know, a long period of time prior to. And I believe the reason for that is because we've just passed the peak of that meteor shower. And meteor showers, especially for things like 6 meters, they'd leave a lot of dust in the upper atmosphere, and that does actually help create more ionization, believe it or not. So especially on things like 6 meters, you can do some pretty good propagation simply because of the meteor showers that we've been getting. You add to that the fact that we are popping up and down just a little bit from this kind of remnant coronal hole stuff. It's not enough to disturb propagation. You know, it's not enough to give you a full solar storm. And so, as I've said in many times in our forecasts, that when you have just a little bit of disturbance, that actually helps amateur radio, and it also helps GPS reception. And that's kind of the situation I think we're seeing right now. So enjoy over the next day or two. I imagine amateur radio propagation will continue to dive, irrespective of what the solar flux numbers say. They're going to be pretty straight, right around in the high 60s or so. But the decent radio propagation that you've been getting over the past few days probably will be coming to an end somewhere around the end of this week. That's what I would, or the end of this next week, is what I would suspect, until or unless we get another active region rotating into Earth view. But I believe that's really what we're seeing here, but there's nothing going on in the X-ray flux, and therefore by proxy the solar flux. We do expect that to continue to be low. And if I switch to the station indices, I'm going to look at just the planetary index. The reason why I pull up this particular chart is because it's got a long baseline. It goes back from January 6th all the way to the present day. And as you can see, we had back on the 5th, that's the last time we actually had some storming. But now we're sitting kind of at unsettled conditions. We've been at unsettled condition. It's dropped down to quiet. There's one pop that we've talked about. You know, I already mentioned that we're going to have pops like this. We might actually pop up to active conditions again over the next couple days. Don't ask me when exactly, because I honestly will not know. We just don't have decent enough models that can tell us this. But this doesn't surprise me all that much. The fact that it only lasted 3 hours, you know, it's just one. It was probably lasted even shorter than that. But the 3-hour mark here is really what the KP is averaged to. So, you know, that you're just going to get a 3-hour marker saying that we had active conditions for that time period. And then it's back down. Look at this, back down to quiet conditions. That's a pretty big jump. But that could easily happen again over the next few days. Now, if I go to what we're going to see else in the solar wind, or I mean, what's coming around the bend for us, let me try to make this faster. This is stereo, and as I mentioned in a previous in the previous video that again I will release on YouTube here very shortly. This is the what looks like the remnant coronal hole from the region that has come around time and time and time again. So this region is still here, but this time it looks radically different. We used to have a connection to this northern polar hole, which we don't. It doesn't look like there's a connection anymore. Oh look, bright spots. Great. Okay, there are some bright regions rotating into view, and that's a change. So this coronal hole, this thing is going to be rotating into Earth view in, let's see, well, we'll wait for it to get through its whole thing. This was back on the 9th. As it goes up through the 12th, we'll see. If it gets to about here on the screen, that's where we start seeing it in Earth view right now. Because stereo is kind of off to Earth's side right now. It's not even behind the sun anymore. So we're getting close. We also do see a little bit of activity. There was a solar storm that was launched up here. So we might see a little bit of activity from this region. It's hard to tell, but there is definitely some level of rearranging going on. And it's interesting to see what it's doing. Again, so this thing should be rotating into Earth view here. Oh geez, probably within the next 24 hours we'll start seeing the front end of it. But you can see it's reasonably dark even in 195. So that's good news. That means that we will get some fast wind and perhaps another chance for a solar storm in about 12 to maybe 14, about 14 days or so. That will be an issue for us. And also you saw those active regions. Those are coming on to the stereo's view, and that means at about, maybe 10 days, maybe a little bit longer, we'll start seeing those, is that right? Yeah, because about mid-disk is about 7 days, so about here, we'll start seeing the bright regions popping around the limb, the east limb of the Earth. So if you amateur radio operators can hang on for another 10 days or so, we might start seeing a boost again in the solar flux. So that's good news for you guys, because if these bright regions continue to emit and they don't die, then yeah, we've got a little reprieve there. So that is pretty much the story. I will run over really quickly. I'll go over the 5 days. These are 5 days that I put up yesterday. I looked at NOAA's update, and it's not really all that different. So we are expecting at high latitudes unsettled conditions pretty much all throughout the week. NOAA is saying 25% of chance of a minor storm, and they're basically throwing that all across the board. I think if we see a lull, we'll see it somewhere around January 14th and maybe a little bit after the 16th. So I actually dropped it down to 15. I probably should have put an asterisk here, because I think we might just get a little bit of a lull in this place. At mid-latitudes, we're expecting unsettled conditions. I do think that there's a chance that we can pop up on the 13th and the 15th. NOAA, they just have about a 10% chance of active conditions once again all throughout the week. So I'm a little bit different from them, not really enough to make a difference. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that there are times that there may be an intensification, and that's only because the small pockets of fast wind will be rotating right into the Earth strike zone at that point, and so they can compress the slower wind in front of it and give us a little bit of a boost in activity right before that fast wind hits from that compression. And I think if that's going to happen, it's going to happen on these days. But give or take, it's always kind of hard to predict during times like this. So that is that one. And then if I go down to, oops, I've got some people in the house, and hopefully they'll, okay. So if we switch to our solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook, again, we are spotless. We have no risk for radio blackouts or any big flares. So GPS users, you guys should be very, very happy on the Earth's day side. The nice thing too is that we have this little unsettled conditions, kind of disturbed conditions, and that helps to make low latitude GPS reception more stable. So everybody in Brazil and in South America, in those regions, in Australia, in those regions where GPS becomes a problem at the low latitudes, you guys should be enjoying some better than average GPS reception, at least over the next few days. Now, regarding the solar flux, I mentioned we're sitting around 69. which is the high range of poor, but we have been getting some decent radio propagation. Part of that has been due, obviously, not to the solar flux, but rather to some of this unsettled conditions that we've been seeing. And another part, I do believe, is because we've just passed the peak of that meteor shower, and so we'll be feeling maybe the effects of that in the upper atmosphere for a few days to come. Now, things probably will continue to go down a little bit every day, a little bit, slowly for you guys in terms of radio propagation. But if you can hang on for about 10 days, we'll be able to pop things back up, because that's when the solar flux will rise. And this actually brings me to a question that I have for everyone. When it comes to amateur radio and shortwave radio, the solar flux doesn't tell the whole story. And so the question, I guess, is to you guys: do you want me to include in the forecast if there's a meteor shower, if there are other sources of ionization in the upper atmosphere that can help radio propagation? It's not something I typically include because it's astronomy, and I'm trying my best to kind of help space weather separate itself a little bit from astronomy. But I'm realizing that some of this stuff really is actionable for you, and it might actually help you understand maybe if there's an extra chance that goes beyond solar flux, to help you, know when propagation might get an extra boost from some other source. So let me know in the comments or in the chat if that sounds like something that would be useful, and I will figure out how to incorporate that. I don't know how to do it quite yet in my 5-day, but I'll figure it out. We have enough meteor showers that it might be worth putting in there, and then you guys can tell me whether or not the forecast with adding the meteor showers as a source of propagation, at least on like 6 meters from 10 meters, for example, if that helps, or if it's just confusing. Because at this point I don't really know, but I think it's worth the dialogue. So just let me know, guys, and I'll go after that, and I'll go off whatever choices you decide. And then regarding, of course, cosmic ray penetration, there's another sticky issue, especially at solar minimum. I was talking to some people at the AMS, as a matter of fact, who were talking about the global climate change and things, and they were talking about how cosmic rays really, in these solar minimums, these deep solar minimums, may be changing the picture of climate change, not from the point of view of cosmic rays directly affecting climate or heating up the planet, but rather because of the well-known fact that cosmic rays actually increase cloud cover. So during these deep solar minimums, as the cosmic rays penetrate more due to the solar minimum, cloud cover increases, and that becomes an effective cooling of the planet. And there are some people, believe it or not, there are some reputable scientists working on this now. And they're trying to team up with meteorologists to figure out what they can reliably say. The problem that we have, of course, is that with cosmic rays and cloud cover, there aren't any historical proxies, really. You can't dig up ice cores and look at the isotope nature of the atoms and the molecules you see in there and say what the cloud cover was. So it's harder to really understand how cloud cover has been affected and how to do robust long-term climatological studies with it. But people are beginning to try, and I think that's fantastic. I think this solar minimum has really woken a lot of people up to how much space weather affects terrestrial weather and vice versa. It's just wonderful to see. So at any rate, getting back to this, we do have that penetration of cosmic rays right now that's higher than it would be normally. And so frequent flyers and prenatal passengers, that's what the PN stands for. If you're flying above 40 degrees latitude and about 35,000 feet or 11 kilometers, which that's about standard cruising altitudes, you are at a higher risk for radiation dose than you would be otherwise, especially those who are flying over 800 hours annually, which is quite a bit. So please take that into consideration in your flight plans, and and just know that solar minimum, we're probably going to be in this for another year or so. We might be seeing this chart not change for about a year, and I wish that were otherwise. But until the sun gets active again, unfortunately, these cosmic rays will continue to have some pretty deep penetration. So that's the story there. And let's see, let me just go back here for a moment, let that play so you guys can get a pretty view of the sun. And let me go, I'm going to reload this to see if I see anybody, if I can see anybody talking more about, do I have any more questions here? Okay, Jerry, you're on. You are live. Sporadic E-propagation is normal in December and January for 6 meters. Thermal layers in the atmosphere. That's true. That's true. We do have sporadic E, and that is also increasing. And that, again, brings me back to the question of, you know, what, especially for amateur radio operators, what do you guys want me to show you when it comes to these 5-day outlooks, or when I talk about amateur radio propagation? I don't want to put so much jargon in there that it, you know, throws everybody else off, but sometimes I feel like solar flux just isn't always enough to help people understand, you know, when the radio propagation will be good. So do I put things in about, you know, sporadic E and tropospheric ducting and, you know, some of these other things that I'd have to change the language, of course, but are they worthy of mentioning? Or are they just too complicated? You know, I don't know. And again, the meteor showers definitely make a difference. I've had multiple people tell me that. So these are interesting things for people who want to actually go out and look up at the sky as well, if their skies are clear. So that might be worthy of putting in. And so that's a dialogue I definitely want to have with you guys. So thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it. I know you're a mini course, you're a VIP, and I appreciate your comments. So we can actually talk about that later on, you know, in person when we have our meeting. Okay, so let me go to YouTube here and just see. Hi from Seattle, hi from London. Let's see if I can get this on my phone now. I wasn't getting the live chat for some reason on my phone. I got it at one point, but then it didn't come back up. Whoops, let me make sure that's off. Yeah, I'm not seeing, on my phone it's not coming up. That's too bad. Okay, so if you don't mind me bending down, I will now look at what the chat is, what's going on in the chat. So, Ditto from, here's a question. What led up to your interest in career with space weather? Oh, that's an interesting thing. You guys want me to talk about my own history in space weather? My goodness. Okay, and I see, what do you foresee the future of space weather? When will it be a part of our nightly news? What is a best space weather app for smartphones? Something like that we can check every day. And any chance Stereo B will be restored and repaired? Oh my goodness. Do you guys know the story of Stereo B? All right, I'll talk about, let me take just a moment to talk about Stereo B before I go on to the more personal questions. Okay, poor Stereo B. You know, we did communicate with it once. We did. I don't know if you guys know that. This was a while ago now, my goodness, a year ago. This was when it was still, it had just come out from behind the sun. And the team was super excited. We were, you know, a couple of my friends, really close friends that I was a grad student with, they were teachers and mentors at the time. Janet Luhman, for example, is a really good friend of mine, and she's the PI of the Stereoseki payload. And I was talking to her, and she was so excited about the turnout. She was so excited about being able to contact Stereo. But they had to be very careful because there was barely any battery power. And they were very nervous. So what they did is they very carefully asked it, you know, to check itself. And what they found was devastating. All of the hydrazine, which is the propellant in the spacecraft, was frozen, completely frozen. And so it could not, they knew that the position, it was kind of still spinning a little bit, and they knew that they needed to be able to fire it up to be able to fire the thrusters to be able to stabilize its position. And so what they were doing is that they were hoping by turning on the heaters, which take a lot of battery power, right? Turning on the heaters just a little bit and trying to thaw some of that hydrazine so that they could actually thrust and get that spacecraft rotation and stuff out of back in control. In the process of doing that, And they didn't turn on any instruments or anything. They didn't want to take the risk of using the battery power for anything other than heating the hydrazine and checking the system, communicating with the spacecraft to try to assess how it was doing. And I don't, obviously, because I'm not a team member, I didn't get all the details from Janet. But in the process of all of that, they lost contact. And they've been struggling to get contact ever since. And they're hoping that as the spacecraft gets closer and closer to Earth, it's going to get to a point where they can communicate with it more easily, and also its spin or what it's doing, how it's rotating, is something that will, because of the way it's rotating around the Earth as well, or rotating around the sun, that somehow those solar panels will hit the sun more often and be able to charge up the battery enough so that they can instigate communication again. But they were really excited for a while, and now it's looking a little bit scarier. But we never give up hope. We've had spacecraft that have been silent for years, and suddenly they spring to life. And that's one of the neat things about spacecraft is, when things freeze or the telemetry stops, that doesn't mean the spacecraft is totally dead, especially with the way we make them. We build them to be robust and have a lot of redundant systems. So I don't think anybody on the stereo team has given up on it yet. We still have a big part of that orbit left to go that's unique, and at any time we might actually get stereo in the right position so that it wakes up. It's able to charge its batteries enough to wake up. So don't think that because we can't communicate with it now, all hope is lost. We're still trying, and as soon as we get anything, we'll let you know. So right now, though, right now it's lights out. So we're just kind of in a hurry up and wait mode, I guess, is what that comes down to. Okay, so I've got questions about the previous course item about the magnetic poles. I noted north magnetic pole is moving toward the North Pole, while the south magnetic pole is moving away from the South Pole. What does that mean, please? Okay, and I don't have my other charts up, so I don't recall, pardon me, I don't recall exactly if, when I talked about the magnetic poles moving, if I explained really well why they're moving. And I do know, I think I mentioned to you that there are two ways that we're measuring the magnetic pole. One is an actual observation of the magnetic pole moving. The other is looking at how the models, as we put these models of the dipole field against the Earth's magnetic field and try to model what the Earth's magnetic field looks like from a dipole point of view, and because we're trying to get an idea of what the dipole component of the Earth's magnetic field is doing, we're looking at how that's moving as well. Now, the observations of the actual magnetic pole are moving far more than the observations of the dipole component of the field. Part of the reason for that is because the Earth's magnetic field is made up of a lot more than just a dipole magnetic field. We have quadrupole, we have octopole. All these components are smaller than the dipole field, but they still exist. And I don't know if I use the analogy of having like bathtub toys, in a child's bathtub. Of course, I'm a mother, so I think of a bathtub with kids' toys in it. Go figure. But if you have a bathtub and it's all soapy and you can't see under the surface, right? It just looks like a tub full of water, and you drain the bathtub. Well, suddenly toys emerge, but they emerge slowly. So you're not sure what you're seeing at first until enough of it is there to kind of expose what it is that you're looking at. Oh, that's a dinosaur. Oh, that's a submarine, kind of thing. Strangely enough, I actually am using that as an analogy for the magnetic poles. Don't ask me why. I'm a little weird, I know. But the point is that the quadrupole moment of Earth's field and the octopole moment and the higher order field components are buried like under the water. The water is the strength of the dipole field. And as that field weakens, it's like draining the tub. Glug, 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 glug. And so suddenly these components are beginning to emerge. Well, when these components begin to show themselves, the thing is their poles aren't anywhere near where the dipole magnetic field's poles are. So the composite, the overall field now changes. So if the quadrupole field component, the North Pole, let's say the top pole, let's just call it the top pole because it's probably not going to be north, is way over there. And the dipole field component, pole is like right here. Well, as this component weakens, then it's going to look like the pole from the dipole field migrates closer and closer to where that quadrupole field is, because that's the next strongest field. That's the biggest toy in the bathtub. So that's what you're seeing, and that's why, for example, when we look at these poles and we look at the observations of the magnetic pole moving, you're seeing this huge and fast move over many, many areas. I mean, I just saw Thomas Ugrukin pinged myself and Liz McDonald on Twitter the other day, giving us a big article about the Earth's magnetic field, the poles, and whether or not we could actually see in the aurora that pole change. We've actually seen it because the magnetic pole is migrating past the international date line. It's now moving towards Siberia, which is kind of cool. But in that fast migration, that's really what you're seeing. And yet, when you look at the models are showing that the dipole field itself, that pole really isn't moving very much. It's just shrinking. The strength of it is shrinking. And so it's really the addition of these other, or the uncovering of these other smaller components, when you add them all together, they're showing up more in the overall Earth's field. The dipole field really isn't moving. It's just getting smaller. So people think, oh no, the dipole field, why is it moving further north or further to the east on this side, on this part, and further to the west on that part? What is our dipole field doing? Is it flipping? Is it spinning like a top? No, it's just shrinking. And what's happening is that now you're getting these other toys in the bathtub, causing the entire Earth's field to change shape. And people think, and so that's why you're getting, what you see in the northern hemisphere is probably going to be the opposite of what you see in the southern hemisphere. But you know what? I'm only saying that as like an intelligent guess, because I've not studied this. I don't really know what direction, where the poles are going to be in the quadrupole field. I need to do homework on that, because that's not my area. I'm not a geomagnetic, I'm not a geologist or a geophysicist that concentrates on the Earth's dynamo. So I know about these extra toys in the bathtub because those types of solutions are very common in math and in physics. So the Earth's dynamo is not the only place we see them. That's why I know them at all. But I have not studied them hardcore, and I don't know exactly how they're going to manifest in Earth. But it looks like with all of the changes, I'm going to need to figure that out. So I will do my homework and catch up on that. But the interesting thing, really, when it comes right down to it, the biggest thing that's going to be affected is not so much us, down on the planet. Yeah, we'll see aurora in different places. We might see aurora at low latitudes. We definitely, everybody who lives in Canada and really high latitudes, Alaska, you guys may not get aurora anymore in a few hundred years. We might be seeing aurora in Brazil. And, that's kind of a neat, Brazil and Hawaii, let's say, in Australia. It'd be like, wow, that's pretty crazy. But really where the impacts really are, and these are serious impacts, they come from navigation, because now, your magnetic pole, your compass on the ground is worthless because the compass doesn't read right anymore. You don't really understand what's north, south, east, and west, especially if the pole is no longer pointing north. If the pole points west and you pull up your compass, it's going to say, west is north. It's like, oh, so we've got to redo all our compasses. Scientists are already having to do that for navigation maps to some degree. The other thing that's going to change is, obviously, GPS, where GPS is good and bad. Now, I talk about now GPS having issues at low latitudes. Well, that whole configuration is going to change, because as the Earth's field reconfigures, so does the space weather around it. That's what's crazy about space weather, is that our magnetic shield, really, it orders everything. And so as we get more poles, or as the poles change, everything that we've always considered high latitude to low latitude, that's going to change. It will still be ordered in terms of high latitude magnetically and low latitude magnetically, but now our geographic latitudes and our magnetic latitudes may be absolutely perpendicular to each other. So when we talk about high latitudes, we're going to have to say magnetic latitude or invariant latitude if we're in space. And that's really going to change how space weather, geez, we think it's complicated now. It's going to get very complicated in a few hundred years. And then, of course, satellites. Their orbits, the orbits that we considered safe, will no longer be safe. The orbits that we considered dangerous will no longer be dangerous. All the dynamics of all of the radiation in the Earth's radiation belts, that's going to be reordered and reconfigured. It's what field is open, what field is closed, how cosmic rays penetrate. It's all going to change, and it's already starting to. So these are the things that scientists are just beginning to recognize and even consider grappling with. And as years go on, this is going to become a bigger and more serious field of study. Space weather, because it's still so new, we already have issues with understanding everything that is required to keep a satellite, its health and safety, intact. And that's going to change very rapidly. So it's a very exciting field to be in right now, but there's a lot of questions that are unknown. So hopefully that answers that. Let's see, Bill Turner, you could add MS. What is MS? MS, sporadic E, and tropoducting to your commentary on Ham Nation until you gauge how your patron audience might like it. Oh, that's a great idea. So what I might do, I have to talk to Don Wilbanks about that and see if he'd let me have a little extra section in my forecast videos that I won't include in the main video, but then I could have a couple test runs on Ham Nation with just those sections in it. That's a great idea. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. I will figure out how to do that. Hi from Sweden. I did radio on 26 and 27 megahertz before now. Now I shoot Aurora. You had radio propagations between Sweden, Norway, Finland during Aurora. Why is that, as it usually goes vertically on those megahertz, on those frequencies? I'm not quite sure I completely understand the question. Was it clear that it was auroral propagation? I mean, I can't tell if you said you shoot aurora. Were you just seeing the aurora, or were you actually getting auroral propagation? Because that wouldn't surprise me one bit. Also, just outside of the aurora, remember there are other types of emanations now that we're understanding. Things like the subauroral arc, and AKA Steve. We have no idea how that's affecting propagation and what that sounds like. What I am waiting for, and I'm waiting for Ham Sci and anyone who's a citizen scientist but is also an amateur radio operator who knows something about aurora. I want to know what Steve propagation sounds like, or subauroral arc propagation sounds like, because we know what typical auroral propagation sounds like, but can you do something like propagation using these subauroral arcs? I think that would be fascinating to know, and I'm just waiting for somebody to put the two and two together and come up with that. So that may be part of the answer right there. Maybe it's creating some type of sporadic E, temporary kind of extra layer that doesn't last very long, but allows you to get some level of propagation that you wouldn't otherwise. And on those frequencies, 26 and 27 megahertz, I don't know. I think it's a really interesting idea to try to chase after that, so that we can quantify some of the effects, especially for radio propagation. Yes, it was aurora in sight. We could talk to each other, so you could tell it was auroral propagation. It had that weird picket fencing sound. That doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't have to be vertically. I mean, you can get aurora, especially if you have coronas, for example. So the aurora is straight overhead. You can get propagation in all sorts of directions. And this was, when was this? Was it during a storm? What was the space weather at that time? Was it quiet? Was it busy? Because remember, the aurora can go over you and then go south of you. If you're in Norway and Sweden, that happens quite frequently. So instead of looking north for the aurora, you look south. And as that happens, wow, you know, I mean, that opens a whole new world of communications that, you know, you could get all sorts of countries and places that you would normally not get. So keep that in mind. We will have to outfit myself with HF equipment to analyze a radio while subaurora arcs are present. That would be great, Notani. Yeah. You know, that's what we need. What we need are people who cross-pollinate, who are auroral photographers and are excited in the visual aspects of aurora, but also are you know, are ham radio operators, or at least have some inkling that they might want to do ham radio or shortwave even. So thank you, Notani, who's also a VIP for us. That's a fantastic idea, and we need to definitely find out who in the community, you know, populates more than one kind of space weather. What I guess I should call them space weather specialties, because that would be very unique. Maybe we could start a group or something where all aurora photographers are also ham radio operators, or ham radio operators who are also aurora photographers or enthusiasts. We should get a group together where we can talk about all of that together as you know, in a single cohesive thing, and it would bring out a whole new kind of citizen science that I don't think anybody's considered doing yet. So that would be really neat. We should talk about that more. Okay, so let me go back to, what do you see for the future of space weather? When will it be part of our nightly news? We are working on that. As a matter of fact, that actually gives me a good segue. I could tell you, I could show you some of the AMS. My goodness, this year for the AMS, I'm sorry, I'm turning my back to you. I apologize. Oh, should I get the phone? Sorry. Oh, today has been a lot of fun. Man. Okay, give me a second, guys, while I look this up here. Okay, come on. Let's do this. Space weather seen through the public eye of social and broadcast media. So this was, looks like I need to pull this up a little bit. Let me turn up so you guys can see it. Can you see that, hopefully? Yeah, it looks like you guys can see it. Yeah, you can see the title. Okay. So this was very cool because, I'm going to see if I can pause this. Hold on. Hopefully it doesn't pause the chat. This was the talk or one of the talks. I gave 3 talks when I was at AMS this past week. And this was the talk that focused on the space weather community. I wanted to talk about you guys. And the difference between last year and this year's AMS was literally night and day. Last year's AMS, so that was January of 2018. Last year we had a joint conference between the broadcasters and the general AMS society. And I thought, okay, what a great way to open a dialogue with broadcasters who are going to be, you know, who are literally on TV. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are station scientists, but a lot of them are doing broadcast weather on television, and try to figure out what their needs are. So we had put together a panel that had one broadcaster. It had Liz McDonald. So one broadcaster was Paul Gross from, I think, Wisconsin. Was he from Wisconsin or Michigan? He's from a high latitude area who sees, you know, they see aurora, and he was already a space weather advocate. And we had Liz McDonald from Aurorasaurus. We had Mike Cook, who hadn't, at the time, he wasn't part of the 557th Weather Wing yet for the Air Force, but he was close. And he worked a little bit with Liz and also worked with myself. And then we had Dolores Knipp, who I saw again at this AMS. She's the one that did the amazing space weather article that talked about the space weather impact of a Carrington event that hit in 1972, which is during the space age. And they had some declassified data, talked about how a ton of military mines that were magnetically activated, they were triggered. And the whole point of those mines, that they were supposed to sense when something, you know, some metal hull of a ship went too close, and that would change the magnetic field nearby, and it would trigger the mines. Well, instead, the solar storm did, and it just detonated all these mines that it shouldn't have done. And that was it was classified for decades and upon decades. And so that was just recently declassified. So she's the one who put that article out. But she was on the panel last year talking about space weather and the impacts, especially when it comes to education. And then we had also Nathaniel Frizzell, who is the leader of HamSci. So all of them were on this panel, and we were talking about resources for broadcasters. And it was really our first kind of handshake with the broadcasters to say, hey, there is a space weather community out there. We do want to help you, and we want to be able to give you tools and resources that you might need to, to be able to start broadcasting space weather information, or at least learning about space weather information so that you can broadcast it on television. And it went over really well, but there was a lot of, I don't want to say blank stares, but a lot of like mind-blown kind of looks, like, wow, this is really cool, but I don't know I wouldn't even know where to start kind of thing. And it was more of them having to wrap their minds around this new concept that space weather might actually be real and relevant. So that's kind of how that one worked. This year, however, what I was asked to give this invited talk, and what was cool about it was that I was specifically asked to do this talk because people are paying attention, not just to what I'm doing, but they're seeing this huge community that we're becoming. And they're seeing all the synergy, they're seeing all of the helpfulness, and apparently you guys you're affecting everything. You are tweeting out not just Aurora photos and ham radio field reports or GPS reports, but you're talking about space weather. You're showing it to the people that follow you, that are in your local communities. You're talking about it to others. News outlets are beginning to pick things up. I'm seeing tweets and reports being picked up by news outlets all over the place. I'm seeing field reporters being highlighted and getting really in-depth interviews in things like Wired and Sky and Telescope in Popular Science. I'm seeing that, and it's being, of course, being featured on the nightly news, especially with Aurora photos, newspaper articles. It's just really beginning to explode. And the funny thing is, NASA and NOAA and all of these other people, all these scientists, they are really beginning to take note. And it's all thanks to you guys. One of the big things that and I'll show you that in this talk really fast, one of the big things that was really cool was I was able to list, at the end of this talk, list all of the space weather experts that are like, PhDs, that were resources for people to go to. And at the end of the talk, I actually, the few that were actually in the audience with me, or in the room as I gave the talk, I made them stand up. So I made Mike Cook stand up, I made Nariaki stand up, and say, go to these people and get your resources from them. And we have people like Chris Mostel, we have people, of course, like Liz McDonald. We have Nathaniel. I need to get him on Twitter. We need to, amateur radio operators, shame Nathaniel to get him on Twitter or some kind of social media so that we can get him, make him online and available as a resource. That's one thing I haven't been able to do yet. But it's growing. We're getting the experts online, and they're engaging. And the more they can engage the public and engage you guys, the more you guys get a chance to learn, and then you can engage others and teach others and pass it on. And it's absolutely being noticed by AMS and by scientists. And I hopefully will start really making an impact at places like AGU as well. So that's part of it. Let me see if I can make this thing work. And so what I started doing, come on, are you going to move forward for me? Okay, so what I started doing, I won't go over this talk, in a huge sense, but I'll go over it a little bit. What I started talking about was that why is space weather so complicated? And I think this is something that really needs to be driven home, is that in the scientist realm, we straddle astronomy so much that what happens is that we just basically say space weather is pretty much anything that the sun does to any planet, any body, any celestial body in the universe. We talk about it's being the planet's interaction with its host star and the surrounding space environment around that celestial body. But what it means is that every planet, every moon, every comet, every asteroid, everything is getting space weather. And it makes the news anytime there is space weather anywhere. So because we have such a broad definition of what space weather is, it causes people to think, well, it's just astronomy, right? It's, you know, you can go to an astronomer and understand as much about space weather as if you went to someone like me. And that's not true at all. You know, but we see aurora at all these planets, and you can see here's Jovian aurora, which is really kind of cool because you can see the EO footprint, you can see the different moons, you can see the footprints from those guys. Here's Saturnian aurora, so you can see Saturn's rings. You know, you've got all sorts of different types of things. And then even the moons can they have magnetic fields of their own, so you can actually get aurora at moons from some of these other planets, and all of that makes the news. And then, of course, you know, we do know, I think the public understands that the main effects of space weather are sun-driven, but we get other sources of space weather, like cosmic rays, for example. We get other stuff too. But cosmic rays, they're anti-correlated. They're the opposite of sun-driven stuff, meaning that when the sun becomes more active, cosmic rays drop. When the sun becomes less active, cosmic rays increase. And that just confuses the heck out of everybody. And that's why I wrote that. I wrote, these complexities dazzle, but they often confuse the public because they can't say, well, wait a minute, is it worse when the sun gets active, or is it better? You know, I can't, it's just too much. It's just too much. So really what I tried to do is say that we need to, maybe I can hit the space bar. Yes. I said we need to reduce it to 4 basic types of space weather. And this is what the mini courses are going to go over. We have solar flares. We have coronal mass ejections or solar storms. We also have fast wind from coronal holes. And then we have solar radiation storms, which are basically driven by all 3 of these, sometimes at the same time. But these are the main 4 that affect Earth. And so expect that. This is going to be the first of the mini courses I'll give on coronal mass ejections, their history, how we detect them, and how we've gotten better. I'll even go into some historical observations like OSO 7 and Solar Max mission and some of the early things that we did to try to detect these structures. And then this will probably be my second one, will be solar flares, so that we can talk about what's different between them. And then this before I go into Earth effects, which is really what we're dealing with radiation storms. And then I talked about the stakeholders, which is all you guys. I won't go into this. You know who you are. I love you all very much. But with scientists, and broadcasters, they don't really understand how much of a need there really is for this stuff. And it's a huge need. And they just have no clue. And then I threw this one in. I don't know if you guys can see the title. The title is so funny, I've kept it for all these years. Let me turn this up just a smidge. Oh, right there. See that? This was from 2013. But I think it really drove the point home that, you know, if there are 7 billion people on the planet and 6 billion have access to mobile phones, but only 4.5 have access to working toilets, what does that say? That if you had a choice between a working toilet and a cell phone, you'd rather choose a cell phone, right? Your mobile technology. I bet you this guy's one of those. And it just really shows where we are and where our mindset is and how we really need to be looking at technology. So, you know, of course that got some laughs. These are all the things that space weather affects, and I won't go into it because you guys know, because you guys have taught me this. This is where all of you have come into play and really educated me on everything that you guys deal with on a daily basis that requires space weather. So these are, I'm going to skip over some of these things. These are some of the examples I was giving them for how space weather disrupts certain things like radio communications. Here's GPS, for example. You can see this is a map of the United States. This was during a storm in 2001. And all that red shows how bad 15 meters plus for position error issues. And we have traveling ionospheric disturbances. We can actually see waves and movement in these errors during big storms. It's amazing, and it just absolutely ripples all the way down to to low latitudes. So people who say, oh, well, it's only under aurora where GPS is affected, no, it's really not. And the more data we get and the more that scientists begin to work with this stuff, we realize that it's changes in how the what we call the total electron content, or TEC, how that changes on a rapid scale. Those changes are really what causes things like scintillation and errors and dropouts, because that's what we're seeing. It's the gradients that are the key. Electric and utility disruptions, melting transformers for big solar storms. That is the standard fare for space weather outreach, but that's not really where things matter. Where you guys, once again, as the community, have taught me, one of the biggest things you guys were interested in the very beginning, believe it or not, was space radiation. And I pulled this out of a poster where they're talking about the cosmic rays. So this is the year 2001 to 2000, moving up to 2012. And this is the number of particles in the cosmic ray flux. And it was going up, 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 up. And you can see this blue line is where we had a previous record high. And it's continued to go up. This was back in the previous solar minimum, and now it's gotten even more intense. We've gone up even 30% above this new record. And people are beginning to really notice that. And one of the biggest ways that they noticed that was Fukushima. Believe it or not, when that happened, everybody started carrying handheld radiation detectors up in planes. And when they did that, it became, they started thinking, okay, there's this big radiation cloud that's going from Tokyo to Los Angeles. And when they take these radiation monitors up there thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to see? And then the radiation monitor goes up and they go, oh my God, there really is a cloud. You know, there really is this radioactive fallout. And it's like, no, 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 this is normal. This is cosmic rays. This is space weather. And when they realized, oh, wait a minute, this is normal, that it really began to up the dialogue and up the visibility of space weather and its importance to us. So you have people like Tony Phillips with spaceweather.com that's doing the hot flights table with RADs on a plane. You have the Space Environment Center with or Space Environment Technologies. I forget Kent Tabisca's group that does NARAS, that was done on a NASA grant. These are all ways that the RADs on a plane does domestic flights in the United States and looks at the dose rates, and then NARAS does it globally. That's why you see NARAS stuff on my in my forecast, because I try to get it globally. But then you start seeing the medical field begin to take off. You're seeing more articles like this, miscarriages among flight attendants. You're seeing cosmic radiation-induced software resets in ICDs. Anybody know what an ICD is? That's a pacemaker. And the idea that we need to, the medical community is now looking at, geez, because of space weather, do we need to make our pacemakers radiation hard? Because nobody wants, one of their family members end up having a heart attack simply because their pacemaker reset because they flew to London or something ridiculous like that. So these things are really beginning to make a big deal. So I talked about how space weather is changing, and that we really have an analog from terrestrial weather to space weather. This was Harry Volkmann was someone that the late Matt Parker told me about, and I didn't realize that he was the very first weather person to take a weather report from a military base. He basically was an amateur radio operator. And there would be these reports coming in CW, in Morse code, and he would translate them. He'd write them down and decipher them, and then he'd go and broadcast them on the nightly news. And unfortunately, he got slammed by many of his colleagues saying, and many people in the government agencies saying, don't do this, you're going to incite a panic. And instead, when he did it anyway. And instead, he got something like 1,600 letters of thank you. We're so happy. We're so glad you're on the job. We feel much safer. All this kind of stuff, because he was giving out tornado warnings for severe weather for the Chicago area. And Matt Parker said to me, Tamitha, I look at you doing the same thing. And that's really kind of where we are today, where we're trying to do space weather the right way with educated people, you know, who understand what this stuff is and know kind of where the limit is when it comes to impacts on the Earth, and trying to make it so that we're giving you information that is actionable, even though it's not as actionable as we'd like it to be. It's not local forecast. It's still very much a global forecast. But nonetheless, it's still something, it's something that's more relevant than just saying, oh, look, there's space weather on Mars, or, you know, look at Titan today, there's some pretty aurora. We're actually trying to give you forecasts that aren't just taxonomy and say, oh, there's a flare that went off, there's a CME that went off, and that type of thing. We're actually trying to say, okay, at this time, you will have impacts, and these are the impacts you can expect, and this is when it will be over, and all of that. So that's really where we're trying to take it. And as we forge this path, we are getting much more attention from the community in AMS. Now, I'm not going to go over this stuff. This was the September event where the big hurricanes were. But I will talk about this. This was something that really blew me away, and this probably more than anything directly answers the question that you asked: when are we going to see this on the nightly news? Well, back in September of 2017, when the huge hurricanes hit, Harvey and Irma, and we had that horrible sunspot on the disk, and it was just firing off the biggest X-class flares of the current solar cycle. So this was, if you go back and you look at my forecast back in September 7th, I think, of 2017, you can see it was a very popular forecast. But I didn't realize how popular it was until one of the field reporters said, hey, Tamitha, have you checked this out? And they gave me a link to YouTube. And it was this thing called Ren TV. And I'm like, what in the world is Ren TV? Ren TV is a Russian-owned network, news network, or just television network. And they had a news anchor come on during a news segment, and you can see the sun in the background. And he was interviewing a bunch of space weather physicists, mainly magnetospheric and solar physicists. And I was listening to it, and I knew that they were genuine because they were using all the right terminology in the right way. I mean, you know, people use the word magnetosphere. Even in Russian, you know what that is. So it looked like they were very legitimate, and they had done their homework. And then suddenly, without any warning, up pops a video of me. And I gasped. I just was like, oh my God. You can see they even cut off, see the Space Weather logo right here, the Space Weather Woman logo? They cut it off. And they broadcasted the part of this space weather forecast that it was my closing segment, and I was talking about how the amateur radio operators, the emergency responders, were going to have trouble because they had the solar flares on the day side, so that was blocking radio propagation. So maybe the night side will be okay. But then we had the two big solar storms that were coming, so when those hit, the night side's not going to be any better. And then we have the radiation storms that were hitting the poles. So I mean, it was just an absolute mess at the time. And that's what I was explaining. And sure enough, this went full screen, and they have my name up there, all in Russian. At least I know what it looks like in Russian now. And they had, there were like 3 seconds of my voice, and then a female translator came on. It was so cool. And she then did the rest of my report in Russian. And I thought, yes. I thought, here it is. This is it, guys. This is the beginning. We're getting it. I mean, it's not in English yet, but I don't care. What I care is that people are finding this and these forecasts, they're finding them relevant enough to consider them an important news story. And the more we see this type of stuff, the closer we are to getting to actually having weather reports that include the sun. So that was part of it. And then, and I won't go over this. This was training in the AMS in the AMS community. We put a survey out for AMS just this past year, and I won't go over all of this, but one thing that I will show you that's really cool. There's 3 questions out of 10, and I just put these things on there. A lot of people want training. This was a question about, do you have any training? This is a question of, do you want training? And the answer was yes, overwhelmingly yes. But this is the question I want to focus on for you guys. It says, is there an unfilled need for space weather expertise in association with your place of employment? green is yes, no is blue. 35% said yes. And these are broadcast meteorologists or meteorologists working at that are in the AMS community. So these are weather people, and they have over a third of them have an unfilled need for space weather. That is just fantastic. Now, we didn't have a lot of respondents, only about a little bit less than 100. Okay, it's not a huge sampling, but that's still, and we didn't really push this survey too much. It was just kind of a, kind of poke people to see who's going to respond and what level of response we're going to get. But it just blew us away that there were that many people and that much of an unfilled need. So it's coming, guys. It's coming. And then last year, I wasn't able to put this chart up. There wasn't anything like this. But this chart, I was so proud of when I put it together, because it says Space Weather Community Network and resources are growing. And this is the one where I made everybody stand up. These are all the people that I could see who have been doing space weather actively and that are experts in it. So you got Mike Cook, he's the 557th. He is a meteorologist who has a space weather minor, one of the first in the bunch. Nariaki Nita, you know him as Halo CME. He's a solar physicist and part of the AIA team for SDO. Chris Mostel, Chris out of space, excellent heliospheric physicist. His focus mainly has been in space, has been in the transit of similar to mine, what we call in situ space weather, where we're looking at how the eruptions of these big solar storms have to propagate, have to travel all the way from the sun to the Earth. And so that huge part of that space is what he looks at, and that's a huge part of the story. But just like I have, Chris also has gone into solar physics and knows solar physics quite well, and I think he's beginning to get into geomagnetic physics as well. And so because that's what the kind of cool thing is, that we have to, when we look at the stuff that's going on in space, in the transit from the sun to the Earth, we also have to kind of know a little bit about the sun and a little bit about the Earth. So he's a really good forecaster from that point of view with a lot of scientific experience. I have an immense amount of respect for him. Liz McDonald is a magnetospheric physicist, but of course you know her as Aurora Soros, Mrs. Tweet Aurora. So Spacey Liz. Brett Carter in Australia has some really good insights because of where he lives. He is an ionospheric physicist, and he isn't online as much as I'd like him to be, and he doesn't do as much nowcasting as I'd like him to. Brett, come on. But he's still an incredible resource online for ionospheric impacts, as well as low latitude geomagnetic responses. So how the Earth responds in low latitudes is someone I go to for that information. And then of course you know me. But I made people stand up who were in the audience, and it was really cool. Some of the top forecasting and nowcasting resources, I put these three up. Live Aurora Networks, you made the list because you're one of the first I've seen that actually are doing live cams and having alerts based on having your camera say, yes, there's active aurora. I hope to see more of these in more locales. That'd be fantastic. But this only covers Iceland. But this, I think you guys are leading the pack to a great degree because you've based your space weather alerts on real visual data, not SWPSI. You are standalone. I mean, you don't even care what the Space Weather Prediction Center says. You are standalone and can do it all by yourselves because you've got the visual confirmation. Space Weather Live, I love you guys because you've translated your site into so many languages. I think that's critical because space weather right now still doesn't have enough space centers all around the globe. And so we do need to be able to translate these and understand that there are people in languages that, English is not the only language spoken. So that's amazing. And of course, Liz, Aurora Soros, you've got that citizen science thing going. So these are Aurora forecasting and nowcasting resources. We also have them for ham radio, Ham Nation and Ham Sci, of course. And then real-time radiation dose and dose rate resources. Here's RADS on a Plane from Tony Phillips with spaceweather.com and Space Environment Technologies, that's Kent Tabisca's group. Both RADS on a Plane, this is domestic flights in America. ARMAS and NARAS are global. But the thing that I was not able to do last year was start separating these things out by the stakeholders themselves. Before it was just, okay, here's a space weather resource, but not so specifically aimed at a certain group. Now, of course, what you see missing, GPS and GNSS. We don't have any things yet for those. So that's something that I'm hoping we can work on this year in our community, is to get the drones and the UAV groups and just the Lyft and Uber users, and start trying to really motivate the GPS and the GNSS community to become field reporters, to start getting into what it means to be able to use GPS in a fashion that helps us promote and helps us understand how space weather is impacting our daily lives. Because this is going to become even more critical to be able to have the GPS field reporters and have apps and have resources available to that community as time goes on. So because it's an emerging market, I understand it hasn't been around nearly as long as some of these others, but it's becoming clear to us that that's a real hole in our resources. So that was really fun to be able to show, and I've gone over it in far more detail with you guys than I was able during my talk. But I did go over this as well. I said the number of credentialed experts active is online and growing fast. And I talked about you guys. I said hundreds of local field reporters, citizen science, and space weather activists are also available. I said the community is currently about 55,000 strong and growing. And I said that's just the people that I know, because I said I looked at YouTube, my followers on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. It's about that. But I said, look at all this other stuff. All of these other people have their own communities that I don't necessarily have as much visibility in. And so that's where I think the strength of our community is that, yeah, okay, we've got this here, but there's so much more. And so we're hundreds of thousands, potentially, hundreds of thousands strong. And I think that's what's really mattering. And what's happening is that we're seeing evidence of a heightened awareness of space weather in popular culture, especially an increase, examples are increase in space weather-based news, articles, and interviews in magazines. Like I said earlier, I'm seeing it with Aurora field reporters, photos being shown everywhere. I'm seeing it with ham radio and people putting up antennas. They're talking and being emergency responders, and they're talking about space weather and what the reports were. I'm seeing news articles of a little bit of GPS, a little bit, not that much yet, but I've seen more experts being cited that are being cited from social media and the tweets that they put up, or something that they've said on Facebook. It's not just the Space Weather Prediction Center anymore. Real live people are being highlighted in news magazines and articles, and it's fantastic. And considering it's solar minimum, and I'm seeing a bunch of reports on solar storms coming and all that kind of stuff. Are you kidding me? The last solar minimum, nobody even thought the sun was awake doing anything, let alone having news articles and media outlets putting out solar storm warnings. It's crazy. So I am just thrilled that we have managed to, in a short period of time, managed to really raise the awareness. And so yes, I do believe, when I look at the future of space weather forecasting, I do believe by next solar maximum, we're going to be seeing space weather reports on the nightly news. And one thing this hasn't gone into, and I will go into this more probably on Patreon, is some of the stuff that I'm working with Mike Cook in Millersville. As a matter of fact, I took this camera. You guys, I'm sure some of you have cameras like this. I love this camera. See that? That's a fly's eye. So it's a 360, essentially a 360 cam. It cuts off the bottom a little bit, but it's a 360 camera. And I got Mike's talk about the stuff we're doing with Millersville on this camera. I have yet to pull it off, so you guys will get a chance to see Mike Cook's whole talk about our certification program we're working with Millersville. We've already got a lot of interest from broadcasters. I know some people from Weather Nation are very interested. We got more questions than I could shake a stick at from students who are coming up through the ranks in meteorology and want to include space weather as part of their set, part of their skill set. So it's coming, guys. It's coming, and it's coming fast. There's very good chance that by the fall of this year, we're going to start teaching a space weather certification course for broadcast space weather. So I will no longer have to be your sole source of space weather. My goal is that I can still do your global stuff, but that we will then have people who are in Michigan, and they're doing the space weather expectations for Michigan. We're having people in, in Arkansas doing space weather reports for Arkansas, let's say for ham radio if there happens to be some inclement weather, or in Florida when there's a hurricane coming. The terrestrial meteorologists will now be talking space weather impacts for the emergency responders, and when during this hurricane and it's expected to make landfall, if we have issues because there's a solar storm coming, and that we're expecting the solar storm to hit at this time on this day, and the hurricane is going to hit at this time at the same day, and oh my goodness, for this short 4 hours or so, there's going to be a lot of problems, especially on the night side. That's something that these people will be interested in, but someone in Michigan, they just care about the aurora. They don't care about the emergency responders nearly so much. So these are things that I can't necessarily go over in a single forecast, otherwise a forecast would take me hours to do. But a local forecaster could. And it's the same thing over the pond. Let's talk about Europe, right? I can do forecasts for the United States pretty easily, but in Europe it's a bit harder. I try to do forecasting for that locale, for let's say Scotland or something, and really who I need is someone like Steph Yardley, who can do a local forecast for James Rowley Hills folks and all of the field reporters in that area. And then I can turn them on to the community there, and then they can give their field reports. They won't have to give them to me necessarily. They can give them to her, or they can give them to both of us, or however it works out. I don't really care. What I care about is that we get this community working and make it be really actionable for local communities now. I think we're past the point where global forecasts are the only thing we need. We really do need to make it something that's much more personable for everyone. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see, we've got more down here. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Thank you. I know your current audience is mostly at the advanced level, but this content is perfect for someone like me. Oh, Erica, I'm so happy. Yes, and when I do when I start doing the mini courses, I am going to break it down quite a bit, so that, and I'm going to try to pull the jargon out so that you won't have to worry about space weather jargon such as, coronal mass ejection. I'm not going to. I'll introduce what the term is, and then I'll go back to using solar storm. So don't expect that simply because I'm going to do a mini course on the solar phenomena that I'm now suddenly going to expect everybody to know these terms and that they're going to have to deal with the scientific terms from now on. No, no, no. It's not necessary, and I really don't want people to shy away from the phenomena and think that they can't understand what's happening simply because the terminology is 17 syllables. Magnetosphere. I mean, who cares, really? Earth's shield, right? That works. So thank you. I'm glad this is turning out to be an okay Q&A. I was worried. Okay, doesn't solar activity protect us from cosmic rays? So cosmic rays may be constant. Protection varies with solar activity. Yes, very savvy. Oh, Bill, that's you again. Yes, you're very savvy. The issue with solar activity in terms, the issue that we have is that when solar activity goes down, we don't have the protection, right? It's when solar activity goes up, that's when cosmic rays reduce. And that's when you'll see my 5-day outlook for cosmic rays. It will stop being in the yellow. It'll go back to the green. But yes, when you talk about transient solar activity, that matters too. When we have a solar storm, for example, a big coronal mass ejection that comes out towards Earth, there is, if you look at the monitors, and we call it neutron monitors, is what we call them here, that really pay attention to the cosmic rays. These are very high energy detectors. And they're huge, they're massive, so that they can detect really low levels of flux, of cosmic ray flux, and get accurate readings. And these detectors will show something called a Forbush decrease. And really what that means is the big eruption that the sun spits off it has a magnetic field, and it's kind of like a magnetic bubble. And I'll go into more of this during the mini course in about 2 weeks. But there's a magnetic bubble, and that magnetic bubble then acts like its own magnetic shield. And so when it hits Earth and we go through it, then what ends up happening is that it shields out even to a greater degree, those cosmic rays than we would have otherwise. And I wished I had, I don't think I have, if I go back to, let's see, let me do this one. I'll show you kind of a little bit of it. Hold on. Come on. Oh, wait. Oh, I can, you know what, I'll show you here. I had it in the other one, I forgot. Right here. So here is a coronal mass ejection, and I had a bigger picture of it. I probably should have shown the other picture. But you can see this kind of loop, right? In this picture, that loop is due to the magnetic shield. It's of the structure. It's due to the magnetic field. That's the whole reason why all that plasma is kind of jailed inside that. And so that magnetic shield's got to be very strong to be able to hold all that plasma in there, you can imagine. And so that, as that expands out into the solar wind, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time it reaches Earth, this thing can be as wide as a quarter of the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So you imagine this tiny, what looks reasonably small is actually monstrous. So it can shield out for several days that cosmic ray flux, and that's what we deal with the what we call Forbush decreases. But of course, when solar activity drops, not only do we see less of these, but the sun's field actually diminishes as well, and so the cosmic rays are able to penetrate more. So yeah, it is absolutely anti-correlated with solar activity. Okay. Sorry, my back is to you again. Let me read more. I anticipate that you will soon have many more people at the entry level who will be very interested in this topic. I hope so. I hope so. I know cosmic rays are EMRs, but when you say in your forecast that cosmic rays can be dangerous on the long run for frequent flyers at high latitudes, are those also channeled by our magnetic field? That's part of the problem with cosmic rays. The primary particles that cosmic rays are mainly protons. And I won't get into too much detail. I do have a chart that could go into what the cosmic ray shower is, and I'll pull that up if you really want me to. But I can also say that for a later time when I talk about radiation storms and radiation in general. But the protons that come in are so incredibly energetic that when they see our magnetic field on our Earth, they do kind of get channeled. They see part of it. As a matter of fact, they do get shielded out. There's something called a geomagnetic cutoff that really low latitudes, our Earth shield is so strong that it repels them completely. But at high latitudes where the field is more open, it does kind of channel them in to some degree, but it's hard to know exactly how they penetrate because they're actually winding around the field in a big circle. And this gets into particle motion, how charged particles move around a magnetic field, which honestly, Adrian, I'll probably need to talk with you offline about because the level of complexity increases very quickly and people can get lost. But they kind of just helically move around these fields and it kind of guides them. But they're not necessarily as trapped as the lower energy particles are because the field isn't really strong enough to capture them and trap them. In some cases they are, like I said, the inner radiation belt is a classic example of where cosmic rays actually do get trapped and now they circle around the Earth. But it only happens at low latitudes. They don't penetrate into the Earth's atmosphere though because of the fact that they're trapped to a great degree. They can stay there, oh my gosh, some cosmic rays stay there for hundreds if not thousands of years. But at high latitudes, they penetrate the upper atmosphere, and what happens is that the proton will hit something. It'll hit a molecule in the air, or it'll go really close to a molecule or in the air, and it will ionize. There are all sorts of different ways we can get what we call cosmic ray showers. You get electrons that spit off. You get, if you hit a molecule directly, you then can get neutrons and pions. And I say it's basically everything but the leprechaun, because you just get so many different particles that spray out. And that becomes, that shower then becomes really what a lot of the neutron monitor, or what the radiation monitors inside planes detect. They don't always detect the primary particle. A lot of times the primary particles always are already causing a shower by the time an airline sees it, because the shower is starting up here and the airline is flying down here. Unless you're in a Concorde, then you can probably hit more of those big particles. But most people don't fly at 60,000 feet. However, as space tourism really takes hold, there are some serious ramifications to going up in space and getting those high doses of radiation, and people will see that. And I do know that Kent Tabisca and his crew are working, they have been working with Worldview, which is one of the balloon makers that took up Alan Eustace and took up Felix Baumgartner. Remember the Red Bull jump? Yeah, that company now is doing, they're trying to get involved in space tourism and do manned balloon flights in a pressurized cabin, and it's like a 3-hour tour. It's Gilligan's Island. You can go up to 100, I think they're doing 110,000 feet, and cruise for a little bit. They jettison the helium balloon and then open a parasail, and an astronaut who's your pilot will then glide you down back safely to the ground. And so you get to see the curvature of the Earth over this 5-hour tour. You get to see the curvature of the Earth. You get to see, what it's really like to be on the rim of space. And yet you don't have to suffer through the e-ticket ride of Virgin Galactic, with the rocket. You don't have to do that kind of crazy ride up there. You can take this very gently, rising cabin ride, and they'll have a full bar and drinks, and you get to just kind of relax on the cruise up, which I think is going to be very popular. But the radiation environment could be, pretty scary, especially if you don't know what's coming. Cosmic rays are one thing, but if let's say you do it during a solar radiation storm, who wants to get 4 CAT scans during that period? Nobody, but probably everybody would love to have aurora be going off during that time that you're in the cabin. So there's a lot of space weather that's going to be happening in that regard, and cosmic rays and all of the particles that come from these cosmic ray showers are an integral part of that. So we're going to be learning a lot more about how that works. And of course, the other issue is that the cabin itself can actually become a source of radiation when some of these particles pass through them, because cosmic rays are so incredibly energetic that when they pass through metal, they actually can light off a cosmic ray shower from the metal itself, from the hull of whatever it is. And so a lot of those tests are being done as well. Now, it doesn't really happen at airline altitudes. If it does, it's not a large portion of the cosmic ray shower, but at the really high altitudes, it could very well be that, because now you're actually getting where that proton is actually hitting the metal hull of whatever vehicle you're in. So there's a lot of stuff that the public doesn't really know about, that we're trying to suss out, and that the scientists themselves, they know the theory, right? But it's never been put into practice, at least not from a human perspective, where you actually have not spacecraft going up and trying to take robotic measurements, but a human being going up and enjoying the sights. This has been always a realm for astronauts, not for just regular human beings. So it's a brave new world, and we're entering it. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. What is a good source for space weather training? That's a great question, Chris. Depends upon the kind of training you want. If you're looking to become a space weather researcher, oh my gosh, there's a ton of them. It really depends upon what you really like to do. Iowa is great for ionosphere. UCLA, my alma mater, is great for magnetic field-based stuff, irrespective of whether it's in the solar wind or in the magnetosphere. and energetic particle type work, radiation belt type physics. UCLA is also great. If you're a broadcaster, if you're a meteorologist, let's say, and you want broadcast training, the kind of training that I'm talking about a little bit here, then obviously follow us to Millersville and we can show you the way there. If you are looking at more engineering styled training, Colorado at the Space Weather Trek, TREC, they're creating a certificate course or set of courses that will help. Excuse me, I've got kids that are playing now. My daughter has a play date over, so if you hear children laughing and stuff, that's them. But if you, again, if you are an engineer and you want to know about satellite operations and you're interested in the engineering side and maybe the designing of spacecraft to be able to survive up in the space environment, then that's Colorado, University of Colorado and the Space Weather Trek. There are new meteorological and research training courses or training programs coming online. Fairbanks, Alaska and Fairbanks, they've got some, and remember they're in the area where they have HARP, so they have a lot of ionospheric research going on and rocket sounding and over the horizon radar. A lot of good ionospheric stuff up there if that's your field of, if that's your interest. Catholic University of America, those guys they're starting a master's program. I think it's going to be mainly research-based, but they're working closely with Goddard and the CCMC, which is NASA's space weather forecasting arm. And I'm not quite sure where they're taking that, if that's going to be more of an academic research type arena or if they're going to go more into operations. Hard to say because they're just getting started. So this is something we should talk about more offline, but because space weather, as you can tell, is very specialized. And by far and large, the universities and the training are still far more geared toward academia because this has been historically an academic field. But we are getting, we're moving more toward meteorology, we're moving more toward weather, and you're going to start seeing a lot more choices coming up within the next 5 years or so. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Okay. Yes, STEM students, here's a career for the future. Yes, absolutely. Being a ham radio operator, this lady is gold. Oh, thank you. Just wait till I get on the bands. For those who don't know, I actually am a ham radio operator. My call sign is WX6SWW, and I can thank Jerry Ryan for that call sign. And he suggested it, and I fell in love with it. And hopefully I'll be on the bands by this summer. We'll see. It's all a matter of how much time I have. But if so, then we'll be able to have some great conversations on the bands as well. Let's see. I feel side of call name for the sun too human. I have no idea what that means. Okay. I saw a documentary that showed the Air Force monitoring of solar activity. Is it possible for the public to see a live stream of our sun? Oh, yeah. We do it all the time. Where am I? Let's see if I can go to here. The Solar Dynamics Observatory, right here. This is a live stream of our sun, essentially. You can get this from the SDO website, and hopefully, do you see that up there? I don't know if you see this, but it's sdo.gsfc.nasa.gov. So SDO, that's the spacecraft, the Solar Dynamics Observatory, .gsfc, that's Goddard Space Flight Center, .nasa.gov. That's a great way to get the information. You can also go directly to Lockheed and look at the sun today from Lockheed Martin because they're the ones who built the AIA instrument that we're looking at here. But I oftentimes go to this site at NASA because they have the movies and it's in real time. But you can get this information very soon. I think it's GOES 16. They have SUVI, which is another version of this instrument, a smaller version made by Lockheed. It doesn't have quite as the power that this instrument has. It doesn't have as many cannons staring at the sun, but it has everything you need to look at the sun in this level of resolution, which is fantastic, and it's operational. So no matter what happens to SDO, I think from now on, the GOES spacecraft will have instruments like this that are going to be this powerful to look at the sun, and at least in EUV. And well, now we got to fight to get a new coronagraph, but we'll see. But the Ghost 16 should be operational here. They're hoping, they're going through the calibrations and all that, and it looks like they're really close to being done. So for those of you who have asked me, and there have been a few, saying, when is SUVI going to be operational? I mean, it's literally right around the corner. Of course, with the government shutdown, that slows things down, and so we're kind of in a wait mode. But I can't imagine that it won't be within the next month or so, you know, barring the government employees being able to get back to work. But yes, so you can look at it in real time. That is not a problem at all. Okay. Hey, how's that monitoring of the sun works? I don't know. Hi, Tamitha. Is a coronal hole an actual hole in the sun? Oh, gosh, no. No, not at all. And that's the funny thing. If I go to a different, as a matter of fact, I'll just show you something. So if I go to the sun now, okay. So these are all live pictures of the sun. And as you can see, here's this is 193 angstroms, and you see that black hole at the top, you see the black hole at the bottom, and these are the little pockets that I was telling you about, the little tiny coronal holes that are giving us some sporadic fast wind. You see all those in this wavelength, in this energy. This corresponds to a layer on the sun's surface, because the sun, think of the sun as an onion, and we're peeling different layers. Each layer has a different energy or a different temperature. And if we look at the sun in different temperatures, then the light that they emit, we can see through the other layers. It makes all the other layers of the onion transparent, so we can see through to whatever layer in the atmosphere we want to look at. So this is one particular layer, this is another, this is another, this is another, and they're all kind of like on top of each other. Okay, so what looks like holes in the sun, really, when you look at a different temperature, they're not holes at all. See that? Right here, you can hardly see that. But look at it here. Look how massive the holes look. Do you see the dark? I mean, the hole looked huge here. Here it looks less huge, and here, nothing at all. Hardly at all here. And look at this. Look at this energy. Nothing. Look at this energy. Once again, nothing, right? These are all different layers on the sun. When you see holes, all that means is that for that particular energy, the sun isn't emitting light. That's all it means. It's not a hole in the sun at all. So people talk about that and it gets very frightening, but it's really not an issue. What it tells us, however, is that that region is cold in a particular layer, and that means that the solar wind, or it means that the material there is actually blowing off of the sun. It's what we call open field. The sun's magnetic field isn't jailing it and keeping it in and heating it up. It's actually opened up and let all that stuff out. So it's blowing straight out and it's cold. And so that says, okay, that's a source of fast solar wind. And what that tells us is that that fast solar wind is going to slam up against slow solar wind ahead of it, and it's going to create a wave. And that wave, just like ripples in the water, right? If you push water against water that isn't moving or water that's moving really slowly, you get a wave. Well, that wave, when it hits Earth, it actually can cause disturbances. And if that wave is big enough, and meaning the fast solar wind is strong enough, it can cause a solar storm. And so I will go over that when I do the mini course on fast solar wind and how all that works, and coronal holes, how all that works. But no, do not worry. It is not a real hole in the sun, never has been. It's just simply dark because it's not emitting light in that particular wavelength, in that particular energy, or that particular temperature, meaning it's cold. And that tells us that we've got fast solar wind coming from those areas. It's kind of a neat little proxy for us to tell what space weather, what is going to be happening with the space weather when we see these. Okay, let's see. What is your prediction for solar cycle 25? Higher or lower than solar cycle 24? That's hard. That's really hard. I can tell you it's coming. The problem is I've seen people say both sides. They've played both sides. Some people say it's going to be slightly higher than this current solar cycle. Some people say it's going to be slightly lower than this current cycle. So obviously I'm going to err in the middle and say, it's going to be about the same. That's about as good as I'm going to give you. When are we going to see it? Well, that's hard to say too. We are definitely in solar minimum now. There is no doubt about it. There are people who say, again, that we should start seeing solar activity pick up in 2019. I've seen some Belgian sites that say it could start as early as a few months from now, summer of 2019. I've seen more, other people say around late 2019 is when we'll start seeing activity pick up again. And then there are some holdouts that say, oh, that's not going to happen until 2020, middle of 2020. From everything I've seen, it looks like we could start seeing activity pick up around the end of 2019. So we've got the rest of this year, unfortunately, to wait. The one cool thing is that when solar activity begins to pick up, man, it picks up fast. So, we won't be seeing just a tiny spot here, kind of something fizzling there. We will see a spot come and then whoosh, we'll start seeing activity pick up really fast. So that's one nice thing, is that once the sun decides to turn on and come out of hibernation, boy, it means business. So get ready, expect to suffer around, I would say easily the next 8 months. We may have a lot of trouble before we start seeing things, but it shouldn't be any worse than what we already have. Some of these coronal holes, we'll still have them even through solar minimum. Things don't get perfect. You don't have everything go to the poles and just have absolutely nothing. You're experiencing solar minimum now. So expect more of the same for about the next 8 months or so. And then it's going to start being a nail biter. Okay, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? But I definitely think we are definitely in the deep part of the solar minimum, and it's not going to be like a grand maximum where we don't see the next cycle coming at all. We already know it's coming. We've seen the new spots already popping here and there, and we've seen evidence even under the surface that the proxies that we use to determine whether the next cycle is coming, we have already seen them, and we've been seeing them for some time now. So don't worry, the next solar cycle is coming. After that, 20 years down the road, I don't know. That's because we are still in a time period where the sun is changing quite a bit. So it's hard to say, is the activity going to start increasing again? Are we just in a Dalton minimum where we just have a couple cycles of slow activity and then it goes back? Or are we really beginning to decrease into something that is going to be a longer, deeper, grand minimum? It's hard to say. But at least we don't have to worry about the sun turning off for the next solar cycle, at least. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. Thanks to Don Wilbanks for getting on Ham Nation. In my opinion, you're a valuable asset to the amateur radio community. Oh, you're so welcome, Ken. Thank you for that. When will your AMS presentations be available for us to view? Well, on the AMS website, those presentations will be available in about 4 to 6 weeks, sadly. But it will have a recording of everything I said. And if you happen to be on Patreon, then I will show you stuff, behind the scenes stuff, even faster. I will be showing, this month I'll probably be showing a lot more extra stuff, that I'll probably make visible to the public. I'm not going to, I'll have it for Patreon members, but I'll also have it all you have to do is just go to Patreon. The link will be hidden on YouTube only because I don't want people to, people use my YouTube channel for forecasts, and I don't want to be cluttering it with a lot of informal, behind the scenes Patreon or behind the scenes AMS stuff. But if you go to Patreon, even if you're not a follower of me, you will be able to see links to a lot of stuff that you can get access to there. Like I said, just because I might put it on a different channel on YouTube or a different account, or I might just keep it hidden just so it doesn't clutter up my public videos on YouTube, because I try to keep that channel clear for everything, clear for just simply forecasts. For that reason. I don't try to make my YouTube channel be a vlog of any kind. I really, for the most part, try to keep it just geared toward forecasts so that people who want the nuts and bolts can get to that stuff easily. So hopefully that answers that question. But you can ping me and we can find out. We can talk about it more. Okay. I've been a ham for just over a year now and have been watching YouTube since oh, that's great. Hopefully this helps you. I need to get on the band so that I can understand it a lot better and understand the impacts a lot better than I do. Okay, let me go back. If there is any other question. I think I've been online for quite some time now, so I'm probably going to shut this down. I know there were some questions that I didn't answer regarding my own private, my own personal thing, like how did I become a space weather scientist, and there's a huge history about that, and I will go into that sometime. But as you can tell, my voice is a bit tired now, so I'll just have to save that for another discussion. But I promise to answer that at some point. And it's a very fun, kind of surreptitious way that I got involved in space weather. I actually have to thank my thesis advisor. He was the one that actually gave me a job before I even knew what space weather was, or really before space weather was even called space weather. And if he hadn't offered me a paying job, because I really needed the money right at that time, I was a starving undergraduate student. And if he hadn't offered me that job, maybe my career would have taken a different direction. So serendipity definitely played a role, and I'm very grateful for it, because it's just, it's allowed me to be, for you guys, what I am, and it's allowed me to, find a wonderful community and just embrace you as much as you have me. This has just been a real thrill for me. So much appreciated. And yes, as time goes on, we are getting to be a bigger and more and bolder and more recognized community. And I'm hoping very soon that people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, when they say, well, what do you think of space weather? And Neil says, well, when I think of space weather, I think of weather on other planets. And I'm thinking, Neil, that's not what space weather is. It's not a terrestrial weather system on Mars. Come on, we're not talking about dust storms on Mars or, a rainstorm on Titan. Space weather is so not that. But unfortunately, there are a lot of astronomers out there who really still look at it that way. And the only way that they even embrace space weather is when they talk about exoplanet weather. And it's like, come on. There are space weather impacts here at Earth, and we need to educate even scientists that are not in a space weather field. We need to educate them so that they understand that space weather is real and it's not what they think it is. So we still have a ways to go, but this community is helping out immensely. And all I can do is just bow to you all and say thank you so much, because it just makes what I do here that much more enjoyable. So, all right, any last questions, guys? Thank you for making all your info understandable for all of us lesser humans. No, not lesser at all. We are all in this together, and you're going to make me tear up, because it just, my heart just explodes. I'm just so grateful to all of you. So don't you dare call yourself lesser, not at all. You guys, every single one of you means so much to me. So don't start that. Okay, what are some good resources for learning about space weather? Oh, again, that's tough. I got to put together a list. Dolores Knipp has a good list, but it depends upon where your starting points are. And so that's going to be something I'm going to need to put together, and I'm working on it. And the nice thing is that the space weather resources are changing all the time. And that's part of the reason why I haven't really put together a list yet, is because there's so much in flux right now with all sorts of new programs that are coming online that if I put together a list now, it's going to be outdated by, literally within 6 months, it's going to be outdated. So give me a little bit more time to get a few things together and understand where some of these some of these university courses are going and these certificate programs are going, and then I will put stuff up. But luckily, it's not going to be just primers on random sites anymore. It's going to be books, and it's going to be universities, and it's going to be real meat and potatoes kind of stuff that you can really sink your teeth into. It's coming. Okay. Great, guys. Can you explain the A and K index? Oh, okay, who is this? Sean. Sean, go back to the very last mini course I did. I did a mini course called All About Indices, and it was 2 hours or something. It was an outrageously long mini course, but it was phenomenal. I had so many people thank me for doing it. I went into incredible depth with no math, so you don't have to worry about that. but I went into incredible depth on what the indices were, how you use them, how many different indices there are, what stations are being used for what index. There is a plethora of information in there for you. And that, yeah, that course is very chock full of it. So I won't go into it now, obviously, but please go see that. It's one of my mini courses. I gave it just last month, and yeah, and it should really answer more questions than you ever even knew you had regarding indices. So please check that out. Okay. Hey, Mike DX, how did you pull out my name like that? Okay. It looks like that's it, guys. Superb. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, guys. I'm seeing all of this. Good job. This was awesome. You're very welcome, guys. I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased you enjoyed it, even though this was kind of off the cuff. So stay tuned. In a couple weeks is when I'll do my very first mini course in the series for, and it's going to start with coronal mass ejections, aka solar storms, and I'll go into their history. I'll go into how we look at them today, and where they're heading, what type of analysis and things we're expecting in the future in terms of space weather research, and also, of course, how they impact us. And that will be the first in a series to kind of give you an idea of what are the space weather phenomenon that hit us every day, so that you can kind of keep them straight. And hopefully that will also help when it comes to understanding my forecasts and when I talk about one versus the other and why it matters. So great today. Thank you so much for all of the wonderful questions. You guys kept me talking for a very long time, and I really appreciate that. I love how how eager you guys are and how much you want to understand. And I hope I hit the mark. Okay, so take care, guys. I will talk to you very soon, and leave extra comments below, and I will get to them as soon as I can. Or if you have other ideas for mini courses in the future, feel free to jostle down your thoughts. I appreciate that. Okay, take care, guys. Talk to you soon.